You are listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, a podcast for Freemasons and the public generally, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. Welcome to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast. My name is Brother Jack Aquilina.
And my name is Brendan McCallum.
And we're your hosts today for the third episode, actually, of the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, which we've entitled the Trowel and Victorian Freemasonry. Brendan, I think that we haven't had the chance to introduce you quite yet.
This is my first appearance on the Brought to Light podcast.
So let's get the listeners a bit of an insight to who Brendan McCallum is.
Brendan McCallum is a Melbourne Freemason, born in Newcastle, joined the craft just over a year ago, about 14 months, and became a master, was raised to Master Mason in October of last year, 2015.
And just so our listeners know, Brendan is you're an actor by profession, is that correct?
I do a lot of things in order to make a coin, Jack.
Yeah, that's the way.
I did train as a professional actor for 3 years at the Victorian College of the Arts, and that love for performance and drama is one of the things that attracted me to Freemasonry in the first place. That sense of sacred drama and the exploring the mysteries through ritual, that sort of thing. But most recently, I've been dedicating myself to the trade of copywriting. So.
Very interesting. And I'm a lawyer by trade, so copywriting, I know it from that perspective. Is pretty interesting stuff. I mean, that's me being sarcastic. But I mean, Brendan is actually he's a member of Brunswick United Lodge number 924 in the Register of Victorian Jurisdiction, Grand Lodge of Victoria. And you've done a few charters in a few degrees, haven't you?
No, just the one.
Just the one?
Yeah,
final in the third or something, was it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some more.
Yeah, well, it's good. I mean, I hope you're enjoying it, and thank you for coming on. I guess the one thing, Brendan, that's really great about this podcast is that we have different hosts with different backgrounds, different experiences, so you get a good perspective. But I thought since you've done your third degree only just recently, this topic that we're going to talk about today is going to be really interesting. We're talking about the trowel.
Yeah.
We're going to get WBro Brother Alan Richmond in, and it used to play an important part in the third degree in a lot of other jurisdictions. So I thought that'd be a bit interesting. But just before we head on, we'll just talk about a little bit about the podcast and its Facebook page. We do have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/brought to light. You can jump on there and have a listen to our past episodes, and also check out our content. So make sure you check that out.
Make contact.
Yeah, make contact. So basically, I think we picked the trowel because the Blue Lounge itself is actually, we've adopted the trowel as like a secondary symbol. It's actually not used anywhere in Victoria, and we thought just to be different, we'd use the trowel as a symbol. So I guess that's sort of informed the conversation today. In your experience in Freemasonry, these symbols that you see everywhere, they can get a bit overwhelming because there's so many of them. But have you come across the trowel before, or do you know much about it?
No, I hadn't. Prior to our discussions about what this episode would be about, I wasn't familiar with it. I don't spend a great deal of time, although perhaps I should, exploring the Freemasonry of other constitutions and other countries. Although I understand there's a great deal of value to be derived from that. So the trowel is new to me.
Well, that's good. Well, I guess we'll all learn something today. But I mean, you've got 2 young kids, you've said before, so I guess that sort of restricts your time a little bit. But family first. That's the rule in Freemasonry: family and work first. But I guess without further ado, we'll kick off with our interview with Worshipful Brother Alan Richmond. We have here today Alan Richmond, or Worshipful Brother Alan Richmond, from the Lodge Kalara. Is that correct, isn't it, Alan? And he's come here today to speak about a very important topic, about the trowel. Where's it gone? Why isn't it part of our ritual?
The forgotten working tool.
Yes, the forgotten working tool. So, Alan, how about you start off by giving us a bit of information about who you are?
Well, as pointed out, my name is Alan Richmond. I'm a member of Lodge Kalara, number 259, Victorian Constitution. I joined Freemasonry at Preston St George, which was a nearby suburb. These days we meet in Greensborough. But in those days, when I joined, 52 and a bit years ago...
That's not too long ago at all, is it?
We met at Preston, and so Preston St George was my mother lodge. I progressed through the chairs, the junior officers, and went to lodges of instruction, rehearsals, and eventually was rewarded with a position in office, advancing through to become master of my lodge in 1973-74.
And how many times have you done that, Alan?
I'm now I've just recently in 2010 done my fourth.
Not a bad effort at all.
Term as a worshipful master, and most of those years I've actually been the almoner of the lodge, which is a subject all of its own for some future date, I presume. But
and an important job.
Well, I think it's the most rewarding job in the craft, to visit the sick, the poor, the distressed, the widowed, etc. So,
yeah, for our listeners that aren't aware of what the almoner's job is, basically the almoner has the responsibility of ensuring that all those brethren who are sick and can't come to a meeting, and their widows and their family, if there's any concerns, they're responsible for chasing that up and keeping the lodge in touch with those people, especially widows. Does your lodge do a lot for widows?
Yes, I've only got about 38 now, but at one stage I had 70. But they've eventually all tended to die out somewhat. But I find that the almoner's job is an important role for any officer in the lodge, and I'm even contemplating writing a book on the subject.
I'm sure we'd love to read it.
I could fill a book, I think, with all my experiences.
Alan, thanks so much for being in here today to speak with us. Now, obviously, the topic of this conversation is relating to the trowel. Now, it's a practical working tool that, for the ordinary member of the public, it wouldn't be too hard to conceptualise or to understand, yet like all the tools in Freemasonry, it has a particularly strong significance for the brethren. Can you just tease out for us why Freemasons think about working tools as important parts of their ceremonies and development?
Well, that's a good question. Working tools of a Mason are used in a symbolic manner and an allegorical manner. They're readily identified symbols of the master masons, or the trade of a mason, the working tools he needs. And it can be shown that with the different working tools we use, it's a progressive science. In other words, we become an entered apprentice, where we start our Masonic career, we then improve and become a fellow craft, able to do the work. I'm talking about literally a Mason, which is what happened, particularly in the olden days, where you had 9-year apprenticeships. You've become a tradesman, and eventually your master, if he was satisfied with your progress, would grant you your indentures and you'd become known as a master mason.
This is in the operative context.
In the operative sense. So as a symbolic mason, we do exactly the same. We join the lodge, know nothing about it. After 52 years, you start to find out something. You still find out things.
There's always things to learn.
Because it's a progressive science. So it's a good example, allegorically, of a mason and his progress. As to the practical working tools, the entered apprentice would do the basic work, like digging and squaring and knocking bits off, fetching and carrying, being at the disposal of the more senior members. But as he progresses, he also then becomes more qualified to do the more detailed part of the work.
He leaves the left-handed screwdriver far behind him and moves on to...
Yes, well, we use American screwdrivers. I don't know are you aware of an American screwdriver?
No, I'm not say I'm familiar with that.
We might upset the Americans by using
American listeners would love that.
No, it was always... I've been brought up in the woodworking and joinery trade, so... someone said once, what's the difference between a carpenter and a joiner? And the answer is about 6 millimetres. So to use an American screwdriver, instead of going to the labour of carefully unscrewing it, a hammer was seen to be a far more appropriate weapon. But so ultimately the master, on his completion of his trade, indentures, he then is entitled to be a master mason, and his working tool, his major working tool, is now the trowel. In ancient times, it was only the master mason that could lay the mortar. Everyone else was subservient. So it was the most important role in building, being the master mason. And even today in England, we're in Australia, on building sites, generally you'll find the foreman or the master of the works is in the woodworking side of it. In other words, a builder come joiner. But in England, it's still the mason or the bricklayer in modern days. It's usually the man in charge of the job.
Now, it's interesting that you've just mentioned that you've actually spent a great part of your life in an operative craft, for the craft of woodworking. How have you found the application of the symbolic and allegorical working tools? How have you found that integrating with your practice as a woodworker? Has it informed it to any degree? Has it been
only in the sense that the same principle would apply. In other words, the mason's trade was selected by our forebears, who knows when, time immemorial, we say, which, take your pick what that means. It's certainly lost in living memory, and documentation only starts to appear in the 16th century.
Yeah.
And but so obviously masonry, the trade of masonry has been around for many, many centuries before that, and certainly the medieval times in Europe, where the major castles and fortresses,
the
cathedrals were built, then that's when the mason, I think, got to the top of the tree. Whereas woodworking was always there, but not to the same magnitude and magnificence as what the stonemason could produce. So that's probably the reason. But the same principle could apply. I mean, if I start work as a young joinery apprentice, then I'll obviously have the basic working tools. But as I progress, then I'll be introduced to the more complicated ones, like spoke shaves and things like that. Mind you, 21st century, it's a different ball game altogether now, and as we can evidence perhaps later on in the talk.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point, because my younger brother's joining Freemasonry in August, and he's a plumber, and I used to talk to him about some of the stuff we use, and he can relate to it on a different level than I can. I look at it from a symbolic or intellectual perspective, but he has that practical application. But I mean, this segues really well into, because I'm pretty ignorant about most working tools that people use, because I'm a lawyer by profession rather than a tradie. So maybe you could give us an idea. What is a trowel? Just the trowel generally. What is it? What was it used for? And just from its operative side, what is a trowel?
Well, the trowel's covered a huge amount of variance over the years, and many trades have used trowels, and I find that the mason's trowel or bricky's trowel, bricklayer, it would be fairly obvious to all. It's a large trowel that when the mortar is mixed, it usually goes onto a mud board, and the mason lifts the mortar off the board with the trowel, and so it covers a nice big surface, but it's also got a pointy end, and which enables him to lay his mortar on with some delicacy rather than just slop it on and hope for the best. So a good trowel hand, of course, can utilise the big trowel with the point to maximum advantage.
So it's obviously a very important tool in operative.
It's as a bricklayer or a stone layer, it's as I say, it's the master's tool. It's the most important tool of the lot. But the trowel is now used has been for many years. Gardeners use trowels, and plasterers use trowels, and plumbers use trowels in all various shapes and sizes. Some round, some square. You'd be surprised how many gauging tools and all these types of things that can be utilised. And
in terms of, obviously it's got this very wide operative use. Symbolically speaking, it sounds like you're feeding into that, that it's used by the master, so the master mason, I'm guessing, would use this tool. I guess the question I'm asking is, how long has the trowel been involved in Freemasonry as a symbol, as an icon?
From time immemorial, Jack.
That's always a good answer.
It's obviously been a tradesman's tool for many decades, in other words, or centuries actually. I mean, as I said earlier, that the medieval masons were using trowels, and that was seen to be the most important tool that the mason would use. But he obviously, as the builder, because bear in mind the mason is not just the man that spreads the mortar. The mason in those traditionally was in charge of the job, and his responsibility was to build that building as a united mass. And that's, of course, where we can use it allegorically in Freemasonry. We're a united band of brothers, and we're cementing the brotherly love, if you like, as will probably come out later in the talk.
So, I mean, I guess what you've said there, it enables the master mason or a master of the works to be able to complete the work by being able to spread the cement, bind the structure, presumably built in the previous 2 degrees symbolically, the entered apprentice and the fellow craft degree. So it would be fair to say that the trowel is a perfecting tool by its very nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's the culmination of the craft of the mason. It's his skill in being able to perfect the building. I mean, apart from being square and plumb and oblong and so forth, the different stones had to be checked and measured and so forth. But essentially, it was up to the mason with his trowel to perfect the job. So your analogy is excellent.
Now, do we use the trowel in Victoria?
Masonically? It's a good question. In fact, it's one of my enigmatic questions that I pose when I give a talk on the trowel. Did we use the trowel? Or your question is, do we? I pose the question, did we? If we did, how come we don't today? Because to all intents and purposes, we don't use it. But my enigmatic question was, perhaps we've always used it and not realised it, which we'll get to later, no doubt.
When was it last used in Victorian masonry, in the ritual sense?
The reference to it, I should just point out to our listeners that the reference made to the trowel in the Victorian Constitution today, and has been since the early 20th century, so 100 years or so ago, the trowel was seen to be able to be transposed by the monarch, or royalty, if you like, who were prepared to join our lodges and exchange the sceptre, which was his rule of authority, so to speak, or his sort of the king's working tool, if you like. The sceptre was an emblem of authority. He was prepared to exchange that for the trowel, which is the tradesman's working tool.
We say the gavel, don't we, in Victoria, don't we? Yeah.
100 years ago, or thereabouts, someone, I believe, changed it. I'm not quite... The only reason he changed it, and had the power to change it, he was obviously a Grand Secretary, or I believe, I'm told, can't verify it, thought it was cumbersome, whatever that's supposed to mean.
Yes.
That's the reading we've had from it. So
seems like the change is a bit cumbersome, actually. But
well, it's unfortunately it changed the whole tenor of it, because in Victoria and other jurisdictions, the gavel is an emblem of authority. The master and the ward are told it's theirs to keep order in the lodge and rule the lodge. In other words, you're going to exchange one emblem of power for another one. It doesn't have anywhere near the effect that changing it for the trowel, or the common gavel even maybe, which was only the mashing hammer of the old days, to start to work the stone. In other words...
It shifts the dynamic of equalisation that occurs.
Well, I think, philosophically, it just put the totally wrong slant on it. And we've evidenced the fact that it is, in the old rituals, the very old workings, 18th century workings, that the king, or the prince, or wherever he was, having joined the lodge, was in fact the junior officer of the next meeting. He was the junior officer. And what's more, he had a trowel in hand to do certain functions in the lodge.
I think that highlights an important part about what is great to be a Freemason, in the sense that when we enter the lodge and we're initiated into the order, all our external rank and esteem disappears. We become equal.
That's
and
right.
I guess the beautiful thing about what you're saying is the original ritual would indicate that royalty are willing to do it, in a sense, bring themselves down on the level with everyone else without it being any detriment to their prerogative or their honour.
Yeah.
And I think the trowel symbolises that, and that's really interesting.
I agree.
Well, it also points out that Freemasonry is an honourable organisation. Otherwise, monarchs wouldn't have joined, or had they joined, they may well have said, "Well, this is not for us." But in fact, even today, in the Grand Lodge of England, there's Prince Michael of Kent. So people that are still in those royal roles, certainly in England, are still active participants in our lodges, rulers.
So when is the... obviously, I was speaking to a brother the other day, and he said that he originally initiated into the Scottish Constitution. And I was asking him about the trowel in preparation for this conversation. He was saying the trowel is so important, and he was saying that it's used in aspects of the third degree, it's an additional working tool in that degree, and it's used in all other respects. So maybe you could give us our listeners a bit of understanding of what constitutions use the trowel at the moment, and why do they still use it? Is it really that important? I know the Americas use it.
Well, to answer your last part of your question, yes, constitutions see no reason to change it. And if you look into an American ritual, or certainly some of them, it may not specify the monarch, but it'll certainly talk about rulers of the land, which essentially is the same indication. But I think that it's been recognised, as we said earlier, that it's appropriate as the prime working tool, that the master should be honoured with that tool. In some constitutions, to answer your original question, out of all the constitutions in the world, and I obviously have only got access to a handful of them, really, so I can't vouch for the whole world, but certainly each Australian state has its own constitution. New Zealand's got it. America has got something like 46 constitutions for their 50-odd states. And I can only find two, and they're both Australian, that say the gavel. Everyone universally say the trowel. And I'm sure you couldn't talk them out of it. Just like I'm trying to convince Victoria to revert to what it ought to be. As far as the working tool for the master is concerned, that's true. In the very olden days, in the 18th century, we only worked 2 degrees: entered apprentice, fellow of the craft. Now, of the fellows of the craft, then there was a period or a point where one of those would be selected to go on and become a master. In the olden days, and probably still applies in some places, once you master your lodge, you virtually stay there forever, till you die or give up through old age or other impairments. You may remain in that position, the master, and he'll generally be someone of some title or rank, and this happens particularly in Europe. He will appoint a ritual committee to carry out the work. He won't necessarily get too involved in the working. So he's somewhat of a figurehead.
Very interesting. And would it be fair to say that we're missing out by not having the trowel?
Well, I just believe it's an omission that was made inadvertently, or maybe, or we can't look back into the motivation of the Grand Secretary that is said to have changed it. He would have obviously had his reasons. The only one we've got was cumbersome, whatever that's supposed to mean.
So you're working towards, it feels like, agitating for the restoration of the trowel. How are you going about that, and what sort of obstacles are you encountering? Is it inertia on the part of on the part of the body, the greater body of Victorian Freemasonry, or
maybe perhaps a lack of education in the membership? Perhaps that's probably one reason as well, I'm assuming.
I'm desperately, if the only thing I succeed in achieving in Freemasonry in Victoria is to get the trowel resurrected, I'll die contented. As a student of the art over all these years, I should point out, as we didn't mention earlier in the introduction, that I've been a member of the Grand Lecturers panel for the last 26 years, possibly the longest serving person. So I've been researching and giving talks, encouraging people to make Masonic education a valuable part of their Masonic careers. Once you've joined Freemasonry, if you just say, all right, I've done my first, second, third, I now know all about it, then what's left? After 52 years, I'm still not only finding out things, but I'm fighting in this case, to get them restored to their rightful place. So I've written to Grand Lodge on a couple of occasions to persuade them to at least discuss the issue, but it's with all the other activities that are on and membership woes and ventures and things like that, I guess it's just low on their priority lists. Like, that's my only interpretation. But after this little effort, with Jack encouraging me, I'm going to make a bit more of a determined effort to at least get it aired.
And I think you've articulated those views fantastically. You've convinced me, and you convinced me a long time ago. Brendan, what do you think? I guess before this interview, we indicated we're talking about it, but I wasn't sure about what your view is. What do you think?
Well, look, I'm happy with the notion of Freemasonry being a dynamic organisation that's open to change, including change in its constitution. But I don't feel that the change in this instance really reflects the greater purpose. It seems like an anomaly that really does alter the philosophical intent of the original ritual, and it's unfortunate that that's the case. I think, particularly for people who maybe come from less privileged backgrounds, just the symbolic importance of that exchange between the sceptre and the trowel is hugely significant, and it's a shame that it's been lost to Victorian Freemasonry, I think.
Yeah, well, look, you've done a good job there, Alan. You've convinced one person by the looks.
No, but I concede that what I'm doing is, in a sense, a technicality. If the whole structure relied on this becoming, this change becoming in place, it's not world shattering. I concede that, but I do see that as an injustice. Any injustice should be rectified, in my humble view. And I also work on other aspects of Freemasonry, mainly to encourage young people like yourselves to show an interest and find out that there's more to Freemasonry than just reading the ritual or hearing the ritual. It's a way of life. It is a philosophy. And if you're prepared to accept the fact that exchanging power for power is fair and reasonable, then surely the idea of surrendering some power to join the mainstream also is praiseworthy.
Agreed, yeah.
That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And this is something that we hear a lot from young members who are joining and interested in joining. It's more than just reading out ritual. It's more than just doing good ritual work and having ceremonies that are enjoyable to watch. It's a way of life. And I think people forget that what we say in the lodge should be practiced outside the lodge. And I think that what you've brought to the table, especially just in this small example, is that the trowel as a symbol is something that we should only be doing in our ceremonies, but something we should be taking outside and practicing in real life. We should be perfecting and cementing our love for humanity and charity and people, and that's a really important thing. And I think that our ritual really needs to reflect that. And if this is the change that really would bring it back to that state, and I think you hit the nail on the head as well, Brendan, where we actually go back to the core of what it is we're meant to be representing and what our organisation's about, then we should do it. And I think it's a matter of just letting people know that this is an issue. Well, not even an issue, more just something that needs to be looked at.
Well, Jack, the other thing is that with the trowel, we've got the the idea of the trowel being a leveller of rank, in the sense that the king's prepared to come and join us as ordinary brethren. But of course the trowel symbolically is also an emblem of charity. And I believe, I've recommended to Grand Lodge that there's no reason in this day of logos being all important that the trowel can't be back to its useful state of being a symbol of charity. Bear in mind that charity can take different forms. People tend to think charity is money, to the salvos or whatever the cause might be. But charity, Masonically, the trowel indicates that charity can be extended physically and psychologically, financially. It covers all those things. You don't have to give money to give charity. The word caritas, Latin for care, means caring for others. In our case, obviously, we apply it to our fellow Masons, but we also say that it should be extended to the whole of our community.
Clearly, you've convinced me, as I said before, and I think that you really make the point well, which is that we need to be able to view Freemasonry in a way that is actually going to be practically significant. And you were talking about charity, which is the most important part, in my view, of the first degree, if not Freemasonry generally. What's one of our slogans? Faith, hope and charity. And I think that, like you said, charity is more than just giving out money. It can be viewed for a lot of prisms. So I guess the sort of a practical question, if you had the ability to bring back the trowel tomorrow, in what way would you bring it back? Without obviously going into too much detail, what way would you bring it back?
Well, I'd resurrect it back to its original and correct position in regard to the monarch, but I would also recommend that it can be utilised in charity. Now, interestingly enough, the trowel probably has been used for more offices as a jewel representing that office than any other. But most of all, and it is in British Freemasonry and certainly in other countries around the world, even in Western Australia, New Zealand, it's the jewel of the charity steward. So in England, which we don't do in Victoria, they appoint a charity steward whose role is to collect alms for the poor and generally look to improving the lodge's finances to enable it to make charitable gestures in the wider community, as well as the individual members thereof. So charity is obviously is the representation of this jewel, which I believe could be used effectively by Grand Lodge and our lodges in general.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. I think that any society is really only as strong as that which binds it, and the trowel clearly has a symbolic significance that speaks to that. Alan, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your insights on the trowel and its role in Freemasonry, and hopefully its future, its return to Victorian Freemasonry. And Jack, over to you.
Well, thank you again on behalf of myself. I've invited you along here to have a chat, and thank you for the informative discussion. I think what you do, Alan, is really important. You look beyond, the veil, if I could use that. You look beyond what is normally, encompassing a Freemason's experience, which is the ritual. You look beyond that, and I think it's important. I think our listeners have got a lot out of that. And for our listeners, we will be posting a paper written by Alan on this topic. He wrote it in response to some of the questions we'd sent him in preparation for this interview. So that will be in the show notes, so you can check that out. And also, if you have any questions for Alan, feel free to direct them through to us. You can send emails to jack@blue.fmvic.com, and we'll send through the questions to Alan, and he'll get back to you, I'm sure. Alan, we'll give you a chance to say some last words and wrap it up. But on behalf of the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, thank you for coming in.
Well, thanks, Jack, and I do congratulate you and the team for having put Freemasonry into the 21st century. I feel like I've spent a lifetime in trying to bring the Grand Lodge into the 20th century, let alone the 21st. But the fact that you've got the Blue Lounge going over here at Brunswick is phenomenal. And so I thank you for the opportunity to be of service to you. Hopefully can do more in the future for you. But it's certainly, if my little effort within the Trowel can be successful, it's encouragement for you guys to look for other quirks in the system that you may be able also to put. Most of all, of course, we're trying to convince the world in general that we're ordinary people, but decent, honest and civil people, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So Freemasonry, I've got no regrets after 52 years of being made a Freemason. I'm proud to say I am one. I'm not frightened to say I'm one. So thanks again, fellas. I'd like to read to you a poem called The Trowel, part written by myself, but after Brother Michael N. Selmore, an American Freemason. The tools of a true master mason, a man who has proven his skill, are all that he chooses, his tasks to correctly fulfil. Most useful of all is the trowel, in order to get the job done. It's the tool for spreading the mortar, uniting the building as one. But we as Freemasons would use it for purpose more noble and grand, as craftsmen have faithfully taught us, and Masonry's rituals command. So Freemasons see on reflection the way that the mortar is spread, is brotherly love and affection, cementing our friendships instead. At the final toast of the evening, the tiler asks us to stand, to point and go left and go right. We perform this last task with our hand. The point, we take up the mortar, and the course, we lay left to right. We cement the bonds of affection and remember a brother's plight.
So that was our interview with Worshipful Brother Alan Richmond, and what a great interview that was. And the listeners might recall that Brendan McCallum, earlier you were saying that you don't know much about the Trowel, you hadn't heard much about it. What do you think of the interview? Did you get much out of that?
I think it was great. I think Alan was very articulate in talking of the history of the Trowel and why he feels it's important that it be sort of restored to its former place in Victorian Freemasonry. For me personally, as a newly encountered symbol, it resonates. I'm someone from not a terrible background by any means, but a family that certainly had to work for everything that it had, and that sense of social equality that the Trowel speaks to, I think is really important. That notion that even the most powerful of the land will willingly give over the symbol of their authority for that labourer's tool. It puzzles me why it was ever removed from Victorian Freemasonry. But I think most importantly too is that it makes clear sense as a working tool in terms of how you'd apply it. You know, not spread yourself too thin in life, but to really focus on getting things in the right measure and the right degree, as with all the other working tools, to achieve a cohesion. Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think the beautiful thing about what Alan was saying is the fact that the living ritual, the ritual being more than just words on a piece of paper and something that we read out in a ceremonial process. I think the Trowel is one of those very practical tools, one of those tools we can take out to the community and really embrace. And it's a shame to think that something so important about natural equality, charity, the concept of finishing the project. I mean, in the first degree, you sort of taught about, the idea of starting your work, building foundation.
The elementary tool.
Yeah, the elementary tool. And then the second degree, you taught obviously to perfect that with the knowledges of nature and science and the liberal arts and science, and all the rest of that. And it's about building the structure up. And the third degree really has to be about finishing that structure.
And bringing it all together.
Bringing it together.
It holds together.
And what better way to symbolise that than a Trowel, And I think that Alan's is an incredible mind, and I think that he's really put his thoughts into this. And I think younger guys in Victoria will be really interested to think that this is something that's been excluded from our ritual. But to our international listeners, it must be really strange for them to hear that we don't do it.
That we don't do it. I think in conversation with Alan as well, it really reveals how much value and worth is there in the larger body of Freemasonry. The older members being people that are such deep fonts of knowledge that you can turn to with questions. You might not get every Freemason being as erudite and as well versed in any given subject as Alan is, but you won't know unless you ask them.
Exactly right. And you know what? That's what I love about Freemasonry. There is a huge generational gap between ourselves and our grandparents' generation. The changes that have happened between their youth and ours is astronomically huge, and we can't even conceptualise how much change has happened. And because of that, it's put a huge gap between us. And I think the one thing I love about Freemasonry is that it brings those two generations together by force, really, but the fact we're all in the same room, and we're all brothers, and we're all being conduced through these ceremonies. And I really love the fact that we can sit down and have a conversation with someone like Alan and talk about these principles and concepts that transcend time, transcend generations, and have universal principles that we can all relate to. Don't you think that's amazing? It's amazing.
Yeah, and he was very generous with his time.
Yeah, he was, and it was fantastic to have him along, and I hope everyone else there listened to it. We want to hear your thoughts, because this is something, even if you aren't a Victorian Freemason, I think it's important that Freemasonry generally has conversations about our ritual. They say you can't innovate in Freemasonry. I think that we need to start reassessing that, because whether it be the Trowel in this instance, and I'm sure there's hundreds of others, it's important that we identify them and try and make sure our ritual continues to be really relevant, especially to people joining.
That's true, and even though there are certain ways of doing things that seem really solidified, and there's a certain strict sense of the rules in Freemasonry, innovation and creativity thrive within strict rules.
Yeah,
so
you're right.
It's important to never sort of overlook that.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I guess they say that rules are made to be broken, and you need them there in the first place to break them, and that's important. I think one important thing that I take away from people like Alan is that when you join Freemasonry, sometimes you don't know what you're getting into. I didn't know what I was getting into, and the fact that these opened up this whole concept of thinking outside the square is important. So I'd encourage people to do that. But anyway, look, I think before we wrap up, we're going to have a paper read, which is called The Trowel by Rabbi Eugene. So I guess we'll jump onto that and then we'll wrap up.
The Trowel by Brother Rabbi Eugene Mannheim. My brothers, mine it is to speak of the trowel, that instrument which, occupying an important position in the work chest of the operative mason, is, as our ritual suggests, the especial tool of the master mason, made use of by operative masons to spread the cement which unites a building into a common mass, but utilised by the free and accepted mason for the more noble purpose of spreading the cement of brotherly love and affection, that cement which unites us into one sacred band or society of friends, among whom no contention should ever exist, but that noble contention, or rather emulation, of who can work best and best agree. What instrument could be of nobler significance? What implement of more glorious inspiration? Through the use of the trowel spreading the cement, the single bricks and stones, once a chaotic mass, now stand united and solid to form this noble edifice which we dedicate this day to the cause of God and Masonry. Through the symbolic service of the Masonic trowel, spreading the cement of brotherly love and affection, we, the individual members, once as separated and chaotic as these stones which house us, are as firmly bound together in a union which dedicates us one for all and all for one. What were this structure which we solemnly consecrate had not the trowel been honestly wielded, or if the cement and mortar should fail it? What were our brotherhood without the bond of love and affection to bind us close? And only as long as this bond continues to unite us, only so long will this temple stand as a true shrine of masonry and of God. Only so long will our brotherhood be a real brotherhood, worthy of its consecration and its vows. Do we need this lesson? Does this thought require the especial emphasis we would wish to give it? Truly, none more. None to which mankind has been more impervious in all times and all ages. 3,000 years ago, on Judea's plain, the prophet of the Lord proclaimed, Behold, it shall come to pass in the latter day that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established at the top of the mountains and exalted above all hills, and all nations shall flow unto it, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall there be war any more. For 2,000 years, not the one seer alone, but all prophets and ministers of Judaism and Christianity together have united to emphasize the same ideal. They have urged and re-urged the truth on the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of all his children. Out of such conviction, they have hoped to bring to dawning the day of universal peace. But look about us today and see the result. Where is the brotherhood, the affection, the peace, the understanding? Do not bigotry, hatred, superstition, ignorance and jealousy flourish as ever before? Are not differences in creed, colour and birth, on the slightest provocation, still found meaningless excuse for savagely warring nations, as for many of their supposed superiors in culture? Does not the whole modern world panorama but demonstrate that whatever our lip service to the ideal of God's fatherhood and man's brotherhood, whatever the hymns and prayers that have arisen from our temples, the songs and prayers were not from the heart, but from the lips of man only? As Master Masons who have taken the obligations of the 3 degrees, brotherhood is our ideal. We have vowed to eradicate darkness, hatred, superstition and misunderstanding from out of our lives and from out of the world as far as lay within our power. Recognizing no particular creed within our lodge room, hailing as brothers the followers of all creeds who are worthy of such recognition, we have taught ourselves, and we hold before the world the constant example that men of different creeds can stand and work together for a common purpose. Living in a world of discord in which brotherhood, love, sympathy and justice are, all too often, nothing more than words, it is urgent beyond expression that we continually re-impress our vows upon our hearts and minds, that we may never lose them from our lives. Most urgent of all is it for us to spread their influence as far and wide in the world as our united power will permit, that thus we may do our share to end the reign of bigotry, hatred and superstition. Thus will we do our part to help hasten the dawning of the day when the glorious brotherhood and peace dream of the prophet shall be realized. As men and Masons, we understand that this task is not easy of accomplishment. But as men and Masons, we have faith in God, in our fellow men, in ourselves. We know that the attainment of the goal is the sure promise of the morrow. In this faith we live and labour on. But note this one thing more, my brothers. Those who wrote our ritual did not harbour the foolish notion that initiation into Masonry would in some mysterious way, in a single moment, through a single act, change the entire nature of the initiate, to make him in a moment the perfect servant of God and man that his obligations require of him. We are not told that as the result of entering into the Masonic fraternity, a man must be at once so filled with the spirit of brotherhood that the spirit of false contention can never again find lodgment within his breast. We are told that it should never again be found within him. The demand is made of each of us who comes to this altar to take the obligation, that he shall continuously thereafter strive to eradicate from his heart the prejudice, error, and misunderstanding that may have filled him in the past, that at last the moment may come when he is a Mason in reality as well as in name. But the burden of making ourselves such true Masons is placed upon our own shoulders and nowhere else. To us ourselves and to no others is the task assigned. It is these high and noble purposes, my brothers, of which the Trowels are here emblematic. These the ideals of which they stand to remind us upon our altar. As we consecrate these Trowels anew this night unto their holy office, unto these same holy purposes, may we, at the same time, reconsecrate ourselves. To these ideals may we vow renewed fidelity. That reading was The Trowel by Brother Rabbi Eugene Mannheimer from the
Builder, I believe, and that was written exactly 100 years ago, so still relevant today. It's absolutely amazing.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all we have for this episode. Thank you, Brendan, for being a co-host today and for the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. I hope you learnt everything I did.
I did. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to being in the chair again.
Once again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Brought to Light Masonic podcast. I'm your host, Jack Aquilina, and we'll speak to you soon. You've been listening to the Brought to Light Masonic Podcast, bringing you to light through discussions and research papers about Australian Freemasonry and the Victorian jurisdiction in particular. We look forward to speaking to you in our next edition, and until then, we're happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.